Privatization. Hey guys, as you know that privatization means sellings of government assets into private market. The privatization policy in Pakistan was introduced at the beginning of 1980s by General Ziaul Haq. However, it continued during Zia's period, and after Zia, through Benazir, Nawaz Sharif, and then Benazir, and then Nawaz Sharif, and then comes to the Pervez Musharraf, and this policy is still continuity after Pervez Musharraf as well. But today specifically we will focus our discussion on the privatization carried out by General Pervez Musharraf, and more importantly the impacts of the privatization which was done by Pervez Musharraf. Guys, if you will if you will have a cursory view of privatization from 1991 to 2006, almost 7 billion rupees have been received against privatization policy. That's by selling different government assets to private sector. The impacts of these policies. Let's first see the positive impacts. First is reduction in cost. That is when those companies were operated by government sector, the cost of production was very high. But the same companies, when sold to the private sector, the cost of production decrease, which creates positive impacts on the economy of Pakistan. And another is increased choice and quality goods, since when these companies were sold to the private sector increased the quality of goods, and also they also increase variety of goods. As a result, people get more choices and quality goods. And another is the production of new goods with new technology. The private companies introduce new technology in their firms. As a result, new goods were produced, and this also create more choices. And the larger share in ownership. When the companies were sold, their shares were sold in open market. As a result, maximum people purchased their shares. As a result, the ownership was distributed to a larger amount of people. And another is strengthening public finance. That is when these companies were sold in private sector, revenue was generated, and moreover they paid large sum of taxes to government, which strengthened the public finance of Pakistan. And that's another is reduction in subsidies. When these companies were owned by government, the government was paying large sum of amount against subsidies to these companies. But when these same companies were sold to private sector, the government stopped paying subsidies to these companies. As a result, it had positive impact on public finance as well. The next is generating economic activity by producing more goods and quality goods. These companies create more economic opportunities in country. That next is the competition. When these companies were sold to private sector, more competition was created, because when they were under government, they had monopoly in number of sectors. But when they were sold to private sector, when private sector came in these sectors, competition increased. For example, in telecom industry, when this was nationalized and the only government was providing telecom services or telephone services, there was no competition. When a private company came in this sector, the competition emerged. As a result, the quality of good improve. And the next is reduction in bureaucratic control. When they were under government, or usually bureaucrats were controlling those companies. As a result, there was huge corruption in these companies, and nepotism was used. But when they were sold in private sector, the bureaucratic control reduced. As a result, corruption and nepotism also reduced in this sector. Now let's see some negative impacts. undervaluation of assets, while selling the companies in private sector, the value was undervalued. Let's see the example of Pakistan Steel Mills. When Pakistan Steel Mill was to be privatized, its value was far less than its actual value. That's why Supreme Court has suspended the privatization of Pakistan Steel Mills, which creates confrontation between Supreme Court and President as well. And the next is bid terms were revised, which creates conflicts. And the third was the pre-qualifications were not properly examined. As a result, so many companies were sold to such firms which were not qualified to properly execute those companies. And next was the Privatization Commission Ordinance 2000. According to the Privatization Commission Ordinance 2000, the amount received from privatization, from this amount, 90% had to be used for debts and 10% was supposed to be used for poverty reduction. But this policy was rarely implemented in the country. And the last one is the annexity among workers. That is, when these companies were sold to private sector, the workers were so annexed, they were worried that once they become private workers, they are exploited. So the workers are anxious, and the annexity of workers create or the annexity of workers become the source of less concentration on their works. This is a negative impact of privatization.